Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Grain Feed, brought to you by EverAg. This is your weekly news feed for all things grain and all things feed. Each week we bring you updates on the markets with unique perspectives from an amazing team of analysts with the intention of helping dairy and livestock producers manage their risk. I'm your host, Jim Matthews, reporting from Chicago in the home office this afternoon. Joining me today from Kansas is our Director of Feed Foundations, Mr. Jake Kingsley. Jake, how are we today?
Doing pretty good. Some nice weather in Kansas. Can do a little crawfish boil this weekend.
Little crawfish boil, you say? Ain't no tradition in Kansas famous for crawfish?
Not in Kansas, at my house specifically. For the last 8 years, we've done one.
Okay, this started in
Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Tulsa, Oklahoma, also famous for crawfish.
Hey, Tulsa's kind of in a sweet spot. This is for a different episode. We got to get back to what matters right now, which is tweets.
We're going to do a dedicated crawfish episode at some point, audience. But in the meantime, yes, we probably have to talk about what happened today as we record on Wednesday. So, Paige, if you would please kindly timestamp the broadcast. It is Wednesday afternoon. It's about 3:20 Chicago time. And I think going into today, we had the markets looking a heck of a lot different than where we have closed. So we're recording Wednesday afternoon. Our settlements today for May corn was up 5 cents at 4.74. Dees corn up 5 cents at 4.50 3/4. We have May beans recover to 20 cents higher at 10.12 3/4, with no beans up 19 1/4, but remaining under $10. But we got close. They're at $9.97. And then soybean meal, that's stubborn little byproduct, up $3.50 per ton for May at $294.50, and up $2.60 for December meal at $3.05 even. Jake, when we started the trading session, I think the screens were red. And then maybe just a few hours ago, the screens turned green. And there was a major dialogue over the last week following last week's Liberation Day announcement. I believe that was Wednesday afternoon in the Rose Garden, in which we were announced that we would be liberated and the fight for that liberation would come through tariffs. And it was a pretty ugly 1 week, especially folks watching their 401ks and other stock market entities that they may have invested in. The grain and feed markets largely remained unchanged from the corn side of things. Beans did not quite like it, though, Jake. But today, we had a tweet this afternoon in which we decided that the reciprocal tariffs on our trade partners would be at 10%, as folks have come to the table to talk to us about it. And we would put a 90-day hold on most of these extra tariffs. Except for China, Jake, we're going to keep things pretty tense with China. And we continue to kind of up the ante with each other in terms of the tariff percentages that we've seen. And yet beans, though, seem to be okay despite the lack of solutions with the Chinese at this point. So, Jake, that all being said, and again, even by the time you listen to this on Thursday afternoon, this might have changed again. So we always maintain that caveat. But, Jake, as we record, what are your thoughts here this afternoon?
I don't know, Jim. I'm confused. We're all along for the ride at this point. Yeah, I think it's pretty chaotic. I think that the market was happy to see that this maybe doesn't have quite as long-term of a timeline as maybe we had expected at first, especially if most other countries are willing to come to the table and start to negotiate in good faith. And so the market is turning around pretty quickly on that. It's certainly created enough volatility for some opportunity as we buy some feed here. It is interesting that soybeans rallied as strongly as they did today, even as we really keep the pressure on China, who would be our biggest buyer of the product, right? So my best guess is that that is moving in tandem with soy oil, which probably came under pressure with us having had a pretty robust soy oil export program going there for a while. Those two seem to be moving along together while soybean meal has been pretty steady the last few days. So I don't have a good explanation for that movement other than what I've just said there. Certainly interested to see how this week finishes out and what we get into next week. I mean, we've got a WASDE report due out tomorrow that they have to have been thrown for a loop, because I think we were talking last week with these tariffs in place, would the WASDE go ahead and make some adjustments with assumptions based on tariffs in place? And now here we are. We were less than 24 hours out and those have been removed. So I'd be very curious to see how the market trades that when it hits. I think we've been expecting an increase in corn demand potentially on the WASDE via exports as those tariffs largely left Canada and Mexico alone, and Mexico's been our largest purchaser of corn. And also almost immediately after last week's tariffs were announced, Japan and South Korea, two other big buyers of corn, came out and said they were not going to retaliate and they wanted to figure this thing out. So demand on the export front on corn seems to be pretty well intact and has the green light to continue as it has been, which would warrant an increase, at least for this current crop year. And then potentially we could see a jump in ethanol demand for corn as the Trump administration had guided the EPA and the powers that be in the ethanol and crude industries to come together and try to figure out how to get to a 15% blend through the summer months, which traditionally is at a 10% blend. So there should be some good demand there if they can come to a resolution. I don't know that that's been nailed down at this time. So that probably is not accounted for in the WASDE, but you could still see a little bit of a hike in ethanol demand on that thing. I don't know. I don't know how it's all going to shape up, because then you also have to remember that we had our acreage numbers released on Monday, March 31st. So we got the first look at that stuff, but our first new crop balance sheet, meaning October 25 to September 26 production, doesn't really hit the WASDE until May. So I had been arguing that maybe they would leave some of these demand movements alone until they have a little bit of cushion from these new crop acres to kind of level things off in May. But I don't know. We might be in for some real fireworks tomorrow.
Yeah, we're trying to keep in mind that, yes, this tariff situation and just the way they are announced and or the reversals are announced, they're coming via tweet or social media notification. So it does cause this sudden volatility in the market. We have to turn our attention to it as advisors, right, and stewards of the industry. But then we also have the more regular, we have our regularly scheduled monthly USDA WASDE report tomorrow, and that is going to have a legitimate impact on our markets as well, and potentially more of that concrete impact and what the market might be waiting for anyway in terms of how we trade this thing through the spring. And so I think, Jake, you noted the ethanol and export numbers. I mean, that's going to determine if we can take this corn balance sheet below 1.5 billion bushels on old crop, or if it maintains that 1.5. I think that has been a psychological number that folks have been looking for. Once upon a time, perhaps in August or September, there was a element of the market that thought we might have a 2 billion bushel balance sheet for this current marketing year. But we recall, dating back to December and January, we took yields notably down from where we had initially projected, and exports were up. We took them back a little bit, a couple months ago, but I think the data has shown you could easily argue those exports could be brought back up, like you mentioned. The ethanol number is already a very high number relative to the last few years. And yes, margins are currently maybe break even for ethanol. And we were talking about that this morning too, of when crude this morning on Wednesday was trading $55 a barrel. We were wondering, what does that mean for the ethanol market? That correlation between ethanol and crude and what that might do to corn. If the crude oil market is pinned under $60 a barrel longer term, now as we record, we of course are trading crude oil above $60 based on that big jump post tariff announcement. But as long as margins are not that great for the ethanol producer, are they going to continue to churn out at this massive pace, especially as stocks remain high? And you brought up the discussion, with the EPA and some of the industry heavyweights on what to do with renewable energy. And Jake, we've been talking about that for a while too, of, the forefront of this thing so far in terms of the Trump administration. Obviously, we've had some immigration policy headlines, definitely the tariff headlines, and then, of course, some DOGE headlines that they haven't been front and center lately from DOGE, but their whole drill is, chopping up, right? We're going to reduce government size through the form of buildings, employees, spending, whatever that looks like. And we kind of just keep that as folks in our industry on the back burners of, does DOGE look at the renewable markets at all? And maybe that was President Trump's way having that EPA conversation of we'll get there potentially unless you guys can figure it out. That I think mostly was affecting the corn market, but also affects the bean market through biodiesel and renewable diesel, which then we, representing the feeder of protein, have to keep an eye on if the crush pace were to slow down because of concerns over the renewable diesel and biodiesel industry. Would that start to limit the amount of protein we have here? If we do or do not have tariffs, how does that impact our export of meal? Which, like you said, Jake, meal and bean oil, their export program has been running pretty well, right, over the last marketing year or so. So does that change, or does it continue to run hot if we can bring most folks back to the table from a trade front? I think what's really interesting, Jake, is that we just have to talk about this so much. It's more than I think we ever bargained for. We were talking with Paige before we started recording about various business classes that we've had to take over the years, whether we did well in them or not. That's up for a different discussion. But we didn't have to envision this type of approach to markets and the way we track these things. So, Jake, as we look beyond WASDE and put tariffs aside, we also have to look at this planting window, which we are now in. Folks by you, I think, in Kansas are already gearing up and running in certain spots, depending on recent weather. But I think we can say folks in the I-states are starting to prime up and do the same. What have you been hearing on that front, Jake?
Yeah, I don't know if they are out in the masses around here yet, but we had an inch of rain this past week, which was much needed. And I think probably this weekend, we're supposed to be in the 80s and 90s. And at that point, you're within a handful of days of deadline that insurance allows you to start to get out into the fields. And you got a pretty reliable 7 or 10 day forecast. I think a lot of folks probably this weekend going to be out in the field getting something done. And I think probably once it starts, it's going to be a race to get this stuff in across most of the Midwest, because we saw just a few days ago parts of the eastern grain belt just getting drenched in rain. And these folks want to have things in before the next system moves through to catch that moisture as the crop's coming up out of the ground.
Yeah, and I think we've talked with some folks about that there's a chance for the I-states here, they're going to try and run as aggressive as pace as possible. But like you've already suggested, Jake, but just looking at our forecast here in Chicago, we've got rain scheduled for tonight. Yet once again, we're still 30s and 40s up here. We're scheduled for more rainfall, middle of next week. So, we are starting to get these waves of precip, which is a good thing because we are fairly on the dry side. We're drier than a year ago at this time, which even last year we thought we were dry. So I think the rain is mostly welcome, and have to also remember it's only April 9th. There's plenty of time to plant this thing and to regain some of that soil moisture that might be needed. But I think between that and the WASDE reports for both tomorrow on Thursday and also in May might also help determine just how much support the corn market actually gets as we move through April and May. And as we look at South America, they're doing okay, right? That corn crop was doing not great in let's say January, February, whereas now it is in better conditions than the 5-year average. They're harvesting at a nice pace in Argentina on that corn crop. Brazilian development weather appears to be okay. So that too, along with our planting window here, should determine whether we trade closer to the $4 mark or the $5 mark as we move through summer, because right now we're dead center in the middle of it, $4.50. So, Jake, that all being said, with tomorrow's WASD, can we get a bold prediction? Because the viewers and listeners may recall that the planting report predictions that you made, which were very bold, you were dead on. You nailed the planting report. You nailed it. I was wrong. You were very right. You deserve credit. You did great. I hope your family took you out to a nice meal of crawfish or whatever. Is that what you guys eat in Wichita most days? A good old Kansas crawfish?
I think we would if we could at this point in the year. It's a delicacy.
Jake, where do you get your crawfish? Where do they come from?
In Wichita, it's actually hard to get it.
I would assume so.
In Tulsa and Dallas-Fort Worth, it was pretty readily available.
Okay.
But there is a food truck that makes a trip once a week to Louisiana and brings back a trailer load of crawfish, and you got to pre-order a few days ahead. So
that's fantastic.
We'll be headed over to pick ours up on Saturday morning.
If he's got some extra gas in the tank, send him up to Chicago. I'd be glad to participate. But besides bold usage of crawfish in Wichita, bold prediction of tomorrow's WASD.
So I think that we are going to leave the U.S. numbers untouched. I really think they're going to push that out to May and give this thing a chance to be padded by a nearly 2 billion bushel ending stocks number on corn in May when they put that new crop number out there. I think where it gets maybe a little bold is that we might see our first increase in Argentine production numbers tomorrow.
Wow.
I think they liked that crop conditions number.
Wow.
Maybe they add a little bit to Brazil, but they might add a couple million metric tons back to Argentina.
I think that's very bold. I mean, the Argentine corn number sits at 50 million tons. I think the industry is, at least according to our insights team here at EverAg, the industry is consensus at about 49.3. So to call an increase in the Argentine corn, and you know what? The data should not argue with you in terms of where conditions are. So I think that's a bold prediction. I like it. I think that the USDA does say at this stage, you know what? We got through the planting report. There's all this noise over here with tariffs, but we're just going to go ahead and raise exports back up anyway. And they're going to raise them by 50 million bushels to bring us to 2.5 billion. And we're going to bring that balance sheet number under 1.5 billion bushels. We're going to bring it just under by a tick, but we're going to do it. I think that's my bold prediction there, is that they actually do it this time.
That's
We've been waiting.
pretty spooky.
Pretty spooky. Well, especially with all this tariff talk. No wonder they've been hesitant to touch exports. But I think this is it. I think they do it tomorrow.
Okay. We will find out.
We will find out.
Tune in at 11 Central.
Yeah. And as folks listen to and view this, you already know the numbers. So hopefully we were at least close in our bold predictions. I can only be hopeful to be close because Jake actually nails these things dead on. So we'll see what happens on Thursday. In the meantime, Jake, have a wonderful crawfish fest this weekend.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think we will.
I bet you will. And thanks as always for your input and participation on the show. We'd also like to thank the EverAg Insights crew for their support. Thank you to Paige for production magic. And thank you to the viewers for watching the Grain Feed. Contact information is on the screen. We greatly appreciate your feedback. That's all for today. We'll see you next time on the Grain Feed.